How we doing, folks? It's Wardy here, and as you guys can see, we're back at it, breaking down all the latest news and rumblings in Mets land. And today, that being November 13th, 2025, we're back at it with our second video here on the platform today. The first one dropped around 11 a.m., headlining the latest negotiations between the Mets and, of course, Scott Boras and Pete Alonso, where things stand there, along with Marte and Byron Buxton trade talks. From there, now we're talking about today, this time dropping around 10 p.m. Eastern, if not later at the time this video dropping. Brandon Nimmo and McNeil and potential trade talks for this Mets team. Will expand as to where this reporting exactly stems from. Why would the Mets even consider trading away one Brandon Nimmo and to a certain degree there in McNeil? From there, we're also going to get into Edwin Diaz and where things stand between himself and the Mets, as we have some key news to break down on the front of him and his active contract negotiations, as he spoke to the media today there in Vegas at the MLB Awards ceremony. And it wasn't just Edwin Diaz talking to the media, as it was the third place finalist in the NL MVP voting, that being Soto. What did Soto have to say in regards to guys like Marte and Pete Alonso, Antoine Richardson, and more? That is what we're going to break down. And to wrap up the show, we're going to get into the latest pitcher that appears to have hit the trade market this offseason, and one that may very well be enticing for David Stearns and this Mets squad. Sit back, relax, and get yourself ready for the ride, which is our latest breakdown here on the platform. All I ask is that you guys hit that like and subscribe on your way in, as it's a great way to support the platform. We are now just 300 subs away from 36,000 on the platform, and we're going to be giving away a jersey to one lucky subscriber once we hit that milestone. So thank you guys so much for your continued support. Let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis in the comments down below to all the following topics that we're getting into today, everybody. And as always, shout out to our amazing sponsor that makes every single show here happen, that being at SeatGeek, that has you covered for all of your ticketing needs. Simply head over there to SeatGeek, everybody, and use my promo code WARDY10, because you're going to get 10% off whatever you need in the ticketing space. Whether that's NFL tickets for my Jets, Giants, or in the case of me, at least Steelers fans. Whether you are a hockey buff and you're a Devils, Islanders, Rangers fan. Whether you are, say, an NBA buff and you're a Nets or a Knicks fan. Whatever the case may be, for whatever you need in the sports front, concert shows, comedy shows, you name it, our great friends there at SeatGeek, again, have you covered. And thanks to them, everybody, I will be attending two amazing events this Saturday in New York. First being at Citi Field, Team Puerto Rico versus Team Dominican Republic, everybody. That's going to be a blast. Carlos Beltran, Carlos Delgado, a lot of other former Mets there in the mix, either as coaches or as active players. And also in the evening, I'll be at Madison Square Garden for, yes, the latest UFC cards. So excited. Cannot wait to see Islam Makhachev go up against Jack there for the title. It's going to be a lot of fun. But again, guys, WARDY10 for 10% off your next ticket purchase. Link down below. Now, without further ado, let's hop right into all the key topics that we have to break down today, everybody. And let's begin here with the following. A piece came out from Joel Sherman that you guys can see over this past night, and states thoughts on what the Mets should consider and why if they decide to be super aggressive this offseason. And in this piece, he, of course, highlighted options for the Mets to consider if they really kind of want to go all in, chips all in the one basket kind of vibe, where you want to compete with the LA Dodgers. Okay, let's go ahead and roll out the red carpet for an Alex Bregman and or Kyle Schwarber. And this is in the scenario where you would say bring back a Pete Alonso even. Let's just go absolutely bananas, knowing we're just an offseason away from a potential extended lockout, which may very well dictate if the Mets can even spend kind of in a not drunken sailor fashion, but really in a exaggerated fashion, the way that we've seen in the past, should there, say, be a salary cap after the next CBA agreement eventually happens. I hope and pray that doesn't happen, but a lot of uncertainty there. And because of that, we're going to see some teams, including that's probably be a little bit more aggressive than one maybe initially thought heading into the offseason, even though I will say everyone should have expected Steve Cohen to be going into this thing scorched earth after what was nothing short of a failure here in 2025. But in this piece, there's one key remark that I want to highlight with each and every one of you, and you guys can, of course, check out the article in its entirety there on the New York Post website, and of course what they have there on X. And it states the following: the Mets could consider moving outfielder Brandon Nimmo this offseason, per Joel Sherman, and expand on this, and I quote, "The word I heard shared by an AL official is that the Mets have spitballed ideas about Nimmo and how much they might have to eat contractually to move him. Now, my initial reaction to this is, listen, I'm not surprised, okay? Brandon Nimmo, after what on the surface looked like a very solid season for the New York Mets, was one that was kind of Jekyll and Hyde, and what you were still getting in the consistency in the offensive production. The defense has continued to unfortunately regress year after year. He's now entering his age 33 season, and for the Mets, they have him locked up until 2031. So Nimmo is not going to be a free agent until the end of his 30s for the most part in a Mets uniform. And do we really think Brandon Nimmo is going to finish his career in a New York Mets uniform? I certainly don't think so, but the biggest hindrance as to why maybe the Mets don't have much say here at the moment has more to do with the simple fact that, let's be honest, everybody, they don't have a whole lot of control here. They can try to leverage play Nimmo, and I feel like if the Mets were at all disrespectful towards Brandon, that would make it easier for him to be like, okay, I'm willing to be traded, but they're not going to do wrong by him necessarily, nor should they. Brandon Nimmo has been such a bright spot in this organization for so many years, and has been nothing but a massive positive influence. I think instrumental in the clubhouse, both on and off the field. He stays super consistent with his positivity, and that's just something that I really admire in a player. You know, Nimmo this past season, as you guys can see, has obviously been one that's been productive, but has fluctuated a bit in the game where you invested in him on that extended 7-8 year contract for a guy that was pushing north of 400 each year with the on base, and a guy that was looking at least 30% above league average as a batter. Yet since that contract has kicked in the past couple seasons, Brandon Nimmo has been more sitting just around above league average at either 8% above league average, or this season, which was 14%. The home run rate has obviously went up the past 3 seasons, as he has had at least 23 or more home runs in each of these 3 years versus being more of a 10 to 15 home run guy. But in the same doing, he has also lacked certain aspects of his approach. Brandon Nimmo, who prided himself on being that true plate setter for many years as the front man in the lineup, batting leadoff for this club, doing great with his on-base ability, looking like a man that you simply cannot strike out. Like, there were many moments where Brandon Nimmo was not far off from like a Luis Ariz and how dominant he was in the strike zone. But it really looks like that Brandon Nimmo, that ship has unfortunately sailed, as he has went more home run hunting, also understanding that we are now in a circumstance where, you know, the game is built off of home runs and power. If Nimmo wants that more longevity at the major league level, it probably will be backed by him being more of the 25 to at best 30 home run guy, even if that means he continues to sacrifice his on-base ability. Now, when I say the Mets don't have a lot of control in this, what I mean by that is Brandon Nimmo has a full no trade clause on his contract. So up until that contract reaches its conclusion, for the most part, the Mets don't have a whole lot to say. They have to approach Brandon and see if he's at all willing to be parted with. And if you're Brandon Nimmo, now having a family already started, already having been embedded in New York for years, why are you going to go out of your way to leave the organization unless the Mets clearly make it known that they don't want him here? And I don't believe the Mets are going to go down that route. I understand why there is a part of them that maybe wants to make a change there, not necessarily just on the culture aspect, but rather just wanting to change, because as much as we love Brandon Nimmo, we haven't won anything with him, you know, and to a lesser degree from Alonso, you know, he's someone that has obviously been important to the team's success, but has he been necessarily the needle mover every time? There have been stretches where he absolutely has been, and I think Brandon Nimmo is so slept on, one of the more underrated guys in the game, but I also believe that we've seen amongst the best play of Brandon Nimmo in his career at this point. He isn't getting any younger, and he falls in that category similar to Jeff McNeil that we're going to get into in this one in regards to why these guys are now susceptible, more than likely, to be traded if the Mets at all have a say here. Because when you look at corner outfield options, when you look at guys that can be a bit more proficient for the Mets defensively and left field, you say to yourself, yeah, if we're really trying to shore up defense and offense, Brandon Nimmo is not necessarily the play for us anymore. He's already a net negative defensive player that we've seen the past couple seasons. So, and it's unfortunate to say that, but it is statistically true. And we have seen Nimmo obviously being not overly great with the noodle arm and left. Obviously, it was more of a problem when he'd play center. And we've also seen him really miss on some balls over the years, too. So, again, I'm not trying to overly nitpick someone like him. I love Brandon Nimmo. I don't want to really see the Mets part ways with him. I don't think that he's inherently the problem for this organization by any stretch. But at the same time, if you really are trying to make a change to the organization, the look of the team, and to maybe have a bit more defensive upside and flexibility, then yeah, it would make sense that you at minimum would ponder and field some offers and see what Nimmo's appetite would be to being traded if that is something the Mets really feel will be better for the organization. You guys let me know in the comments down below. Do you think it would be the right or wrong move for the Mets to actually part ways with Brandon Nimmo this offseason, where they somehow, some way could sway him to lift that no-trade clause? I doubt it. I really would be surprised if that happens, and that's why I did not have him involved. My video earlier this year on, Mets who will not return next season, because, listen, he's a very difficult contract to part ways with right now. He has all the leverage. And he's not a bad player. That's another thing to take away from this. The Mets having Nimmo as their starting left fielder and a guy who can definitely get some DH reps now, I could say, I think would only bode well for him, his longevity. But Nimmo's a guy I want in this team. Nimmo's a guy that I really hope can be a part of this core group still, with them having deep playoff success. I still believe that he can be a valuable asset to this organization. But again, I understand that we are now reaching a point where you basically can't go any stone unturned when figuring out what is best for this roster construction heading into next season. And when we talk about roster construction, everybody, it doesn't just stop there with someone like Brandon Nimmo, but it continues on, as you guys can see right here, right now, not just in this piece, but also in the following piece from John Heyman. And this just dropped over the past hour at the time this video dropping. Mets are listening on Jeff McNeil in trade talks here. And in this piece, he goes on to break down that, yes, Jeff McNeil has been not only someone that the Mets have been floating out there in the market, but teams have been showing levels of interest. And this is not at all surprising to me, nor should this be surprising for you. Now, pair this report with a report that also dropped a little bit earlier today by the Post, which is the following from Joel Sherman here, that Jeff McNeil had surgery shortly after the season. Now, before people freak out about this, he had thoracic outlet syndrome surgery. Yes, that is that same surgery that can tend to derail pitchers' careers to a degree. Thankfully for Jeff, he's not a pitcher, and this is something that he should be able to make a full recovery for and be set for spring training. That has been what has the reported belief to be from Joel Sherman of the New York Post here. So my response to that is, as long as Jeff doesn't really need to prove too much, hopefully, beyond getting into spring training, I'd imagine that there's still a very strong reality that he's parted with. And that's why I've been saying all offseason long that I think Jeff McNeil is just a prime candidate to be dealt. And here's why, everybody. Let's get into the reasoning. And it's multiple reasons, but in case you have not been here before, let me break it down for you simply. Jeff McNeil just had the best season that he's had since his 2022 batting title year, where he bested Freddie Freeman in the National League. Jeff McNeil also is entering technically the final year of his contract, as there's a 2027 club option for the most part, which means that after next year, the Mets don't really have to commit to him if they don't want to, especially at making over $15 million for the upcoming season. Technically, it's 2 years, 31.5, but it's really one if the Mets say no thank you after the 2026 year. He's also entering his age 34 season, is not getting any younger, and has still proven plus versatility from both second base to the outfield. And that versatility has been important for David Stearns of this Mets club. And that's why trading him is not something that Mets should just do for the sake of doing per se, but in return for, say, a quality reliever to a degree, or a different asset that can benefit this club, it would make sense, because the Mets have an abundance of infield options right now. And if Stearns is going to really pride himself on what he just said to the media and GM meetings the past couple of days, which is that the Mets are really expecting a youth movement heading in next year, that we want to have a balance with our veterans, guys that are on the roster that are impactful, and guys that we know are knocking on the door for the minor leagues that are going to impact us and really, have a difference at the major league level. And there's no immediate route for guys like Jet Williams, and to lesser degrees Carson Bench, unless you make roster room for them, which is by trading the guy who's been clogging those spots each of the past number of years, and that's Jeff McNeil. And I don't see this as a slight to Jeff, because he was certainly a positive, I think, for the Mets this past season, especially. It's just, unfortunately for him, it feels like that this is part of the culture shift for the Mets that they've been wanting to do for a bit, to break away from the older core. And two, he isn't getting any younger. Knowing he's entering his age 34 season, when you have Jet Williams, Carson Bench, and I'm not even talking about Brett Beatty and his value at both second and third base. I'm not even talking about what the Mets still may do when it comes to guys like Luis Angel Acuna and Ronnie Mauricio. There's still a lot of options there, and it just makes little sense, in my opinion, I think the opinions of many, to continue to run it back with Jeff when his most important aspect of his game for Stearns of the Mets now is his versatility more than anything else. He's not a guy that's going to be hitting for high contact. He's not going to be slugging greatly for you because of the fact that he's just not a big power hitter. Even though he's brought more power in his game, what you see down below is indicative on what you should expect. He's a 10 to 15 home run guy at best, and he's not even batting 250 for you. He's just over 400 on the slug. He's getting on base at a solid rate, but nothing that's, otherworldly. And his value has held true, which is it's nice to see him be 11% above league average this past year. But again, take advantage of the value that you still have with him, and you're in technically the final year of his deal in many ways. So why not go ahead and try to part ways with an expiring contract that is, I think, attractive to teams probably more than most. And Heyman did go on to state that he believes that McNeil is actually more attractive than Ketel Marte in the sense of contract. And I think that's really true. Ketel Marte, who we broke down on the platform yesterday in our live stream and, of course, video that dropped earlier today, I should say, is an awesome option, probably the most well-rounded second baseman in baseball. But he's 32, and he's under contract until, I believe, 2031 or so, like Nimmo. And that's just not really attractive for teams, even with how good the AAV is. And the AAV is not bad for Ketel. It's more so just the years than anything else. McNeil, 2 years, including that club option, at $31.5 million, there's absolutely going to continue to be suitors. So all I'm saying is, Mets fans, while it might not be a guarantee to immediately happen, do not at all be surprised should Jeff McNeil be traded this offseason. I think between himself and Nimmo, McNeil's 10 times more likely to be traded for obvious reasons. And for the Mets, if they trade Nimmo, you only trade Nimmo if you do it because you're finding a viable replacement in the corner outfield and really expanding maybe both the offense and the defense of the team. And it could also go in hand to a degree when we talk about someone like Nimmo in particular, that the Mets may have an appetite to try to trade him if they can find a proper suitor in turn for a rotational starter that'll really help this team now, where it could be more of a win-win kind of trade scenario if the Mets find viable replacement options. Because I think they can find a viable replacement option for Nimmo. I mean, Cody Bellinger's right there. I mean, let's be honest. I'm taking Cody Bellinger over Brandon Nimmo on this Mets roster right now. And it has everything to do with not necessarily age, but experience, versatility, and defensive value. Because the bat belly is neck and neck there with Nimmo. And you could rightfully argue that Belly is a better hitter in certain aspects than Nimmo. But defensive versatility, Belly is, you know what? Perfect way to explain Bellinger. He's the power of a Brandon Nimmo. Better, you could rightfully say, than a Brandon Nimmo, but more in that range. And he is the versatile player like a Jeff McNeil. Combine that together, that's Cody Bellinger. And that's a player who the Mets are in the market for that we broke down the platform yesterday in our live stream and separate videos. So make sure to check those out in case you haven't. And Bellinger makes an abundance of reasons of sense. And if you go after and you land him as your Nimmo replacement after, say, you traded Nimmo for a viable starter, I mean, I don't think most Mets fans would find themselves complaining there, even if the Mets had to eat a good chunk of that salary. But to expand as to what that starter could be, there are many guys out there in the market that I think would make sense for the Mets. But there are only select teams out there that would be willing to trade away a quality starter and are looking for Brandon Nimmo and potentially dealing with not a bad AAV, but just a contract that's going to have some term. If Steve Cohen is willing to eat a good chunk of that, why not make a trade potentially happen? I'm not saying they need to. I'm just saying this as a possibility given the reports that came out today. Why don't we go ahead and let's actually go ahead and talk right here. Will Salmon of the Athletic, shout out to Will. At the time when club executives are doubting whether some top of the rotation pitchers get moved, Royals starter Kris Bubic, an all-star last season, is garnering trade interest from multiple teams, league sources said. Now, in this article, it did not necessarily state those teams that have shown interest at this point, but you'd have to imagine the Mets find themselves in this conversation. And Bubic, and I apologize if it's Bubic, potato, either way, we're here to talk about Kris. And the Southpaw just had himself a damn good season this past year for the Kansas City Royals that we saw. And what I really am fascinated by with someone like him is the fact that I really do think that he does make sense for the Mets right now. A 2027 free agent that we see there, 28 years of age, a lefty that this past season that we saw in 116 innings, who gave a 2.5 ERA, a 3.1 expected ERA, a sub-3 FIP, 116 strikeouts, right around a 9K per 9, and a 3 walks per 9. And the reason as to why I'm talking about Kris in particular here is because other reports stated today that the Royals are also in the market for a corner outfielder. So we have a Brandon Nimmo that checks off that box, and Kris added to the Mets rotation would obviously be an upgrade for them. Would he be a needle mover in the sense of being an ace starter? No. And I can see why that would deter fans. But I guess my response is, do you think you could get an ace caliber starter for Brandon Nimmo? I don't believe you can. Not just because of his value right now, but more so on his age, where he's at in his career. How many teams are going to go out of their way to trade an ace caliber starter for a Brandon Nimmo profile with that kind of contract? It just doesn't really add up right now. But this makes a lot more sense, especially if Cohen is willing to eat the money, because Kris's numbers are interesting. When we take a look at the Baseball Savant page, because the highlights there are fun, but when we take a look at Savant and what he did this season, there's a lot to like here. And you got that arsenal, of course, the four-seam fastball that's sitting right around 38% of the arsenal at 92. Not a hard thrower at all, but that has not been an issue for him. He does not give up all that much in the hard contact. Changeup, 21%, right around 85 to 86 miles per hour. Sweeper, 21%, right around 83 miles per hour. We look at the slider, 13%, right around 85 miles per hour, and the sinker, right around 92 miles per hour. We know that the Mets in their lab love the S's, whether it's the sweepers, the sliders, the sinkers, and the splitties. All those pitches are things that the Mets tend to enjoy. But to expand more on that, as you guys can see, he had himself a really good season this past year. And we're looking at the 87th percentile in pitching run value, 61st in fastball run value, 90th in breaking run value, 75th in off-speed run value, 84th in expected ERA, 74th in expected batting average, just 18th in velo for his fastball, but that's okay because it's 87th in average exit velocity, so he's doing a really good job on not getting hit hard, obviously, that we're seeing, and that ground ball rate tells you that. Chase percentage at 89 percentile, whip percentage at 76 percentile, K percentage at 63rd, walk percentage just below league average, barrel percentage 78th percentile, hard hit percentage 60th percentile, ground ball percentage 71st percentile, and extension 85th percentile. Now, my biggest qualm that I have with Kris is not what he did this past season, because that was far from the issue. It's more so on the lack of track record, because when we look at Kris, he had a 130 inning season at the age of 23 in 2021. He put up a 4.4 ERA. 2022, he had 129 innings. He had put up a 5.5 ERA. We look at 2023, he was out most of that year with injury. 2024, again, only had himself a limited sample size of 30 innings. He looked good there in that limited sample size. But this was really his first breakout season at least 100 innings of doing it at a quality rate. So there isn't a whole lot of track record here with Kris. So I can understand why that would deter some fans from going after him. But at the same time, some people are probably looking at Kris and saying, let's buy in now because he's now finally figuring it out. And if the Royals can get him right, what makes you think that a team that has more information when making proper pitching adjustments, that they wouldn't be able to figure this out continued here with the Mets in their lab? So for all those reasons, I'm not opposed to a guy like Kris. I think he's a very fascinating option for the Mets to consider. But do I think he is the guy that the Mets should be going after, like if they're only landing one true star this offseason? No. I think that there are better options out there. I think there are guys with greater track records and can give you more longevity in your rotation. Because Kris only going 116 innings this past year, hasn't went beyond 130 in his career. That's not overly encouraging if you're trying to get workhorses in this rotation that can, again, be a top 2, top 3 guy for you. So that's what we have there in Kris, everybody. And we have a lot more that we got to break down in this one. So let's now go away from him and let's get on to the other reporting that we have to get into today, folks. All right, let me go ahead. Let me pull this up now. I'm just going to check my notes to make sure that I have this all in proper order for each and every one of you. Makes it easier for me as it does for you. So we talked about McNeil. We talked about Nimmo. All right, so let's go ahead and get to the Edwin Diaz remarks. I think that will be important. Actually, before we get to Diaz, let's get into a couple quick updates today that we saw just on the Mets front in general that I think you guys are going to appreciate. As you guys can see there, Juan Soto, as I mentioned earlier, was third in the finalist votings for MVP. I'll just say that's a joke. Soto had a better season than Kyle Schwarber this year. Oh, I hit 55 home runs. Yeah, okay. Big whoop-de-doo, buddy. That was your career year. This was another stereotypical Juan Soto season where he put up now 40-plus home runs, 100-plus runs scored. We're looking at 100-plus walks. We're looking at almost 40 stolen bases. I mean, there's only a handful of players that have done in MLB's history what Juan Soto just did this past year, if at all. So kind of ridiculous to me that he was not at least second to voting. It makes sense that Ohtani was going to be the unanimous one. When you have a unicorn, there's only so much you can do, unfortunately. And Ohtani's amazing. I'm not going to discredit him in any which way, shape, or form. Just frustrating because he's on a rival that is right in the way of the Mets trying to get where they want to be. The Mets are also in their own way, so it's not just the Dodgers' fault. I'll make that clear. But these were the votes, too. We saw him. He got 4 second-place votes, 15 third-place votes, 9 fourth-place votes, and 2 fifth-place votes. And last but not least on the updates, I just want to show you that, yes, the Mets 2026 Hall of Fame inductees have been announced, and they're awesome. We have Lee Mazzilli, we have Mr. Bobby Valentine, which I really, really love, and Carlos Beltran. So congratulations to Bobby, Carlos, and Lee for all now being inducted into the Mets Hall of Fame that we're going to be seeing for next season. And I hope to attend, hopefully, the game that they go ahead and make the Hall of Fame induction actually happen. Now, to go on from talking about all that fun news, let's here to talk about the Edwin Diaz news, because initially we saw Francis Romero earlier today on X saying how hearing from the GM meetings that the reliever market could start moving in the next few hours with big names such as Edwin Diaz, Devin Williams, Robert Suarez, and Raisel Iglesias and Ryan Helsley. It was already a trend at the last trade deadline. And to Francis's credit, this is held true to a degree because we actually have new information regarding contract negotiations with the Mets and Edwin Diaz. So let's go ahead and flag down what exactly that is. And let's get into this one. So as you guys can see here, Edwin Diaz at the MLB Awards in Vegas said there have been discussions between his representation and the Mets about a new contract. He put the odds of a return to Queens at 50-50. Then we see here, okay, more Edwin Diaz. Let's go here on his free agent priority. Just get the best deal for my family. I love New York. I would love to stay in New York, but if I have to go to another place, I would be happy. I want to win a ring. So wherever I go, I want to win a ring and enjoy the time. So what Edwin just said was, again, verbatim, would love to return to the Mets. I really do hope it happens, but I'm going to be happy if I land elsewhere too, because he wants to win. And that's his way of saying, I know I'm only going to sign with a top contender. It's true. You're not going to see a team like the Pittsburgh Pirates going out of their way to sign Edwin Diaz this offseason. It's going to be a team like the LA Dodgers or like the New York Yankees, God forbid, but it's a possibility, like the top contending teams that are going to be looking for star closers. But I'm still very confident in the Mets bringing Edwin Diaz back. And one, the qualifying offer really, really helps them. So that's something that I'm going to continue to amplify. Knowing that a team has to give up draft pick compensation and money should they sign Diaz automatically helps the Mets' chances of bringing him back. The way that it helped hurt Alonso's market for the Mets in their favor an offseason ago. But Diaz, the numbers speak for themselves down there. I'm not going to pitch to you on why the Mets should bring him back. We all know very well why we should bring back one of them, not the best closer in baseball. But as he expands more on these quotes here, everybody, that you guys can see, more on Diaz. I like the organization. You know, if they came with the best deal for me, I'd enjoy to stay with them. By the end of the day, I don't know what they're thinking. So that is just him saying that they're in the early talks of negotiations. And him saying 50-50 is, I think, a perfect line for someone who is not going to, of course, show their cards at all, especially in the media. So to anyone that is having an overreaction to Edwin Diaz's remarks, please take a step back and listen to the following. What makes you think it is at all the right idea for someone who opted out of a contract, they still had a lot of millions for the next couple of years, to do if he was going to show his cards and like go on his hands and knees begging to return to the Mets? Why wouldn't he play his cards and play his hand to make it known that he'd be happy anywhere he goes? And the reason why you do that is because you maximize your market, you maximize your value, and you maximize the suitors showing interest in you. It's as simple as that. And it comes down to, quite literally, the Mets making sure that they outbid and best any other team. So whether it's the Dodgers, whether it's the Yankees, whether it's the Blue Jays, what have you, Steve Cohen can simply not be bested in the pursuit of bringing back their star closer. Because if they are bested, it'll be because Edwin Diaz is going to another top contender that may very well directly hurt the Mets in more ways than we could possibly imagine. Just the thought of Edwin Diaz in a Dodger uniform should have Steve Cohen already putting out the blank check for this man. And before you say to yourself, oh, why should we unravel the red carpet for an Edwin Diaz and give him another, say, close to record-breaking contract when the Mets aren't even at the point of being like a team that's a lock to make the World Series? It doesn't make sense. And my reply to that is, How in God's name do you expect the Mets to get to the World Series? How do you expect them to have continued success? You expect them by doing that by having top players and premier positions. The LA Dodgers do it because they have basically an all-star in every single position on their roster. Okay? Without that, they're not going to have the same levels of success. Believe it or not. For the Mets, the same applies. The more top players you have, the more success you're likely going to have along with it. Now, having top players does not automatically equate success, but what it does do is put you in the right direction to make it more of a seamless thing to happen. And for Edwin Diaz, he's proven himself not only at the major league level, but specifically with the Mets in more ways than one that we've seen for an extended period of time now, that it would be nothing short of an absolute shame the Mets cannot bring him back. Because even if, say, Edwin was getting another $100 million contract, who's losing sleep over that? And who's believing that he can't be a fine wine and be productive for you as he enters his then mid-30s? Like, we've seen many relievers dominate in mid-late 30s. David Robertson's still kicking buddies past 40. You know, I know he didn't have the best year this year, but Kirby Yates the year prior with the Texas Rangers, almost 40, was killing it. Aroldis Chapman, first year in Boston, looking better than he ever had in a Yankee uniform. Make it make sense. So the point is as long as Edwin can stay healthy, not blow up his knee again like he did in the WBC a couple years ago, the Mets will be in great hands to have a star closer long-term that'll be of great impact for them for a number of years. And for David Stearns, you shouldn't have much stubbornness in making this happen, because Edwin Diaz should not at all hinder you from making big moves elsewhere. And on top of it, if you really want to get creative, if you're really concerned about, the 90+% tax of $300 million or more on your salary for the Steve Cohen tax that's league-wide, as we know, then go heavy with the deferments. It takes two to tango, okay? The Dodgers have been playing this game and manipulating this in ways that no other team has done to the same degree. Nearly to the same degree. Why not go ahead and take another one out of the Dodgers playbook? And that means you have to give Edwin Diaz 20 to 30+ mil deferred. You do it. The Dodgers did it with Tanner Scott. They're happy they did it with Tanner Scott, because if they're giving all that money up front, they would be fuming, because Tanner Scott was not even on their playoff roster when they went on to win the World Series this year. That's how dog water Buddy was first year in LA. He just knew it was going to be easy to cruise, get a big payday, and not really have to care again, because he's on a star-studded team that's going to back him up every single chance he gets. And I hope that Edwin Diaz looks at what they did to his brother, Alexis, and uses that as fuel to not want to be an LA Dodger, because his brother was picked up by the Dodgers this year. Didn't work out. He unfortunately says not. He's fallen off a cliff, sadly, past couple of years. His brother, who was initially a really good-looking reliever that we saw from, that we saw from the Reds. But point is, Edwin Diaz, he's made it abundantly clear that he would love to return to the Mets, and he just hopes that the Mets are the top offer. It's clear that Diaz is going to likely go to the highest bidder, and that highest bidder will be a contending team. So you can't fault him in that sense. As much as a part of me is pissed off at the idea of Edwin Diaz walking after being a record-breaking contract, the most money ever in Major League Baseball history to a reliever on one single contract of $100+ million, it feels like a little bit of a smack in the face of Steve Cohen, but at the same time, you have to do what's best for you and your family, especially in this market. That's just how it is. So I see both sides of the coin, but all I know is the Mets don't have a replacement for Edwin Diaz. And there are very few relievers, if any, in baseball that are better than him currently speaking. For all those reasons and then some, for the continued success of his dominance that we've seen at the major league level the past number of years, you have to do everything in your power to simply bring Sugar back. You guys let me know your thoughts on Edwin Diaz in the comments down below. I really do appreciate that. But now, guys, let's go on from talking about Edwin to let's get into some other key quotes here. And let's get into now not just Edwin Diaz, but Juan Soto, because Juan did speak to the media that we saw there at the awards. And we're going to see some key quotes that he had to share with each and every one of you. And these quotes did, in fact, include the following, everybody. Let's go ahead and check them out. Soto strongly advocates for re-signing Alonso and Marte, says Laura Albanese there for Newsday. Pete, I hope we can have more times to come and more fun together. Marte, you need a guy that helps you the most through those tough times and tries to bring the team back to where it's supposed to be. Now, let's not forget, Starling Marte is a man who Soto heavily credited this year, as being the captain of the team, a leader in more ways than one. And look at the numbers down below. Marte had a very respectable season for the Mets this year, but he's entering his age 37 year. He can bat close to 280 in his sleep. We know that. Again, 12% above league average in these 98 games. Here's the pros and the cons with bringing Marte back. Let's start with the cons. The cons is that if you bring Marte back, you then consider another year of a platoon DH role where you're lacking clear power, where you're going to see other top contending teams maximize power in said position. That's a possibility. Another con is that a man who's really not one you want to throw in the outfield at this point in his career is going to be a limited, lack of defensive valued option for you that you would have mainly on the bench. And the assumption where, say, you got someone to really be more of your true DH or have a nice rotation of guys that provide more power, let's say. Now let's get into the pros. As I mentioned, Marte bats 270 to 280 in his sleep every year. Doesn't matter the situation. He just typically does it when he's healthy, when he's right. Soto loves him. He's loved him since he's entered the league. He's had a long-lasting relationship with him. And he not only views him as a captain, but he views him as a true leader in this organization. I know that he's not the only player that feels that way. Marte's beloved by many. And if we've learned anything from the past year, team morale is unbelievably important. The Mets decided to part ways with Jose Iglesias because they want to go with Nick Madrigal as their utility option. Nick Madrigal not only never played a game for the New York Mets as he broke his shoulder the first ever play he made in spring training, which is comical in how it happened. I feel for him, but it's just kind of crazy. To not bring back someone who was such a vibes guy for you. No, put the performance aside because it was very good. Just the vibes alone was imperative to try to bring Iglesias back to continue that. The Mets said no. And you could tell that they lacked a vibe and a feel all year long. They looked like a team that was far from having as much fun at times where they could have had. Not that they were unhappy, but it could have been better. They could have been a bit more loose. JD Martinez, a veteran, not the most viable bat for you. Literally played his last year in the league as a New York Met. Would have loved him 5 to 10 years prior, but point stands. JDM is a fantastic mind, a hitting savant, and did wonders with guys like Mark Vientos, as well as just really impacting the greater good of the organization, helping them in a deep playoff run that year as a World Series champion and a future Hall of Famer. So that kind of value is stuff that you just cannot replace with other talents. And that's why the experience of what Marte's brought with his elite base running over the years, even though he's not that same guy, that value both on and off the field is definitely one that you could argue as to why the Mets should do everything in their power to still bring Marte back. And on top of it, Marte, I'm sure, would be more than happy to return the Mets on a very team-friendly contract as someone that you don't have to pay like 20 mil AAV for this time around. You can get him at, a much more reasonable cost on a one-year deal and just have him as one of your key bench pinch hitting options where I think Marte could really thrive in that role, especially against lefties, and the occasional starts in DH for when you think it's really best, as long as it's not too much. As long as Marte knows that he's going to be in a very limited role with the organization, even more limited than this past year, I'm not opposed to bringing him back because I do think that there's still value in his bat and what he brings in this clubhouse that supersedes the need to have elite, versatile defensive options for every single guy on your bench. I think you can sacrifice one spot there with Marte, but in order to sacrifice that one spot, that means you pretty much have to trade Mark Vientos because it is really hard to justify having another year with multiple players coming off your bench that bring you little to absolutely no defensive value. You just cannot do that. And the Mets learned the hard way again this year how bad your defense can be when you do not have things properly constructed there. So that's what I have to say about that. Juan Soto on Antoine Richardson's departure. The two were close. It was really sad. It was really sad. But you've got to understand, it's a business at the end of the day, still the business of the game, and you've got to take it like a man and move forward. So Soto's clearly not happy about what happened with Antoine Richardson, but maybe if Antoine Richardson wasn't a schmuck and looked at the Mets' initial contract offer, said, yeah, let me go talk to teams, and let me wait to come back, and let me also get a contract that would allow me to leave the organization if I found a better role elsewhere at any point this offseason. That didn't happen. Richardson would still be here. Instead, he waited too long. Mets didn't have any pension that they could give them left because they already gave pensions to their 4 other new contract hires of coaches, and that's all there is to it. So beyond that, there was another quote that I want to share here, and this comes from Mike Puma, as you guys can see here, who is doing a very good job on the post there in attendance in Vegas. Juan Soto citing Starling Marte's leadership as a big reason, and we talked about that. But this is more of the quote on Alonso. I hope nothing but the best, and I'm excited to see where he's going to end up. He's one of the best power hitters in this generation. I really enjoyed my moment with him in a Mets uniform, and I hope we can have more times to come. We can have fun together. My reply to that is 80-plus home runs, 230-plus RBIs combined between those two sluggers this year is a prime example as to why they can most certainly have fun together moving forward. Let's hope and pray that both Alonso and Diaz return and have ourselves nothing short of a fantastic offseason. Mets fans, that's going to do it for our breakdown. Thank you all so much for watching. Let me know your initial reactions, thoughts, and analysis in the comments down below to all the following topics that we had tonight at the time of this being a late night drop. Really do appreciate you guys watching. And as always, no matter what, everybody, no matter what, let's go Mets. Peace out, folks.